By the middle of the 9th century, England was a land under siege. Viking warriors, seafarers from Norway and Denmark, had begun launching brutal raids along the coasts of the British Isles. These weren't just seasonal plunder missions. Over time, they evolved into full-scale invasions. In 865, a massive force known as the Great Heathen Army landed in East Anglia. Unlike earlier raiders, they came to conquer and settle. Within a few years, they had overrun 3 of the 4 great Anglo-Saxon kingdoms: Northumbria, East Anglia, and Mercia. Only one kingdom remained standing: Wessex. Wessex was the last line of defense for Anglo-Saxon England, and at its head was a young king, Alfred. Alfred became king in 871, just as Wessex became the last independent kingdom in England. He was immediately thrust into war, fighting off wave after wave of Viking attacks. At times, his situation was so desperate that he was forced into hiding in the marshes of Æthelflæd, reduced to guerrilla tactics. In 878, Alfred defeated the Viking leader Guthrum at the Battle of Edington, forcing him to convert to Christianity and agree to a territorial division of England, establishing the Danelaw in the north and east, while Wessex remained free. Alfred didn't just survive, he reorganized his kingdom. He built fortified towns called burhs, reformed the military, revived education, and laid the groundwork for a unified English identity. For these reasons, he would later be known as Alfred the Great, the only English king ever to be given that title. But even Alfred couldn't complete the work of reconquering England. That task would fall to his son. When Alfred died in 899, the survival of Wessex rested on the shoulders of his heir, Edward. Unlike Alfred, who had fought to preserve his kingdom, Edward would go on the offensive. He would lead armies into the Danelaw, reclaim lost territory, and consolidate Anglo-Saxon power across the land. This is the story of Edward the Elder, a king often overshadowed by his famous father and his even more famous son, Athelstan. Edward was born around 874, during the height of the Viking threat in England. As the eldest son of Alfred the Great and Æthelflæd, he was raised not only as a prince of Wessex, but as a future king during wartime. Unlike many royal heirs, Edward didn't grow up in peace or luxury. His formative years were spent in a kingdom under constant pressure, where every decision made by his father was focused on survival and rebuilding. He received a strong religious and military education. Alfred placed great importance on learning, so Edward was taught Latin, scripture, and the laws of the land. At the same time, he was trained in warfare, diplomacy, and statecraft, preparing him for the challenges he would inevitably face. By the time Edward reached adulthood, he was already involved in the governance of Wessex. He likely commanded troops and helped oversee the construction of burhs. Alfred gradually entrusted him with more responsibility, ensuring a smooth transition when the time came. That time arrived in October 899, when Alfred died. Edward, as the eldest son, was the natural successor, but even then, succession in Anglo-Saxon England was not always guaranteed. A rival claim came from Æthelflæd, the son of Alfred's older brother, King Æthelred I. Æthelflæd argued that he had a better hereditary claim to the throne, and he refused to recognize Edward's rule. He seized royal estates at Wimborne and Christchurch in Dorset, but realizing he lacked strong support in Wessex, he fled to the Danelaw, where he found allies among the Danish Vikings. The situation escalated quickly. In 901, Æthelflæd returned with Viking backing, launching raids into Mercia and Wessex. The conflict culminated in the Battle of the Home in 902. Edward's forces clashed with the Danes in East Anglia. The battle was costly but decisive. Æthelflæd was killed, ending his challenge once and for all. With his throne now secure, Edward the Elder turned to the unfinished task that his father had left behind: the reconquest of the Danelaw and the expansion of Anglo-Saxon rule across England. Edward formed a powerful alliance with his sister Æthelflæd, the Lady of the Mercians. Widowed in 911 after the death of her husband Æthelred, she assumed control of Mercia and proved to be a capable and determined ruler in her own right. Together, the siblings launched a coordinated campaign of military conquest and fortification. From 910 onwards, Edward and Æthelflæd began building and strengthening burhs, fortified settlements strategically placed to defend territory and control movement. These burhs were not just military structures, they also served as administrative and economic centers, helping to consolidate authority in newly secured regions. In the same year, Edward's army, alongside allied Mercian forces, scored a major victory at the Battle of Tettenhall. Several Viking kings from Northumbria were killed, severely weakening Danish influence in the north and halting Viking raids into the heart of Anglo-Saxon England. It was a critical moment. For the first time in decades, the balance of power was shifting. Meanwhile, Æthelflæd led successful campaigns in Derby and Leicester, bringing parts of the Danelaw under Mercian control. Their strategy was methodical. They didn't simply attack, they fortified, administered, and absorbed. The Danish lords who submitted were allowed to keep some power, but always under Edward's overlordship. In 918, Æthelflæd died. Her daughter Ælfwine briefly succeeded her, but Edward quickly moved to assume direct control over Mercia, bringing it under the crown of Wessex for the first time. By 920, Edward ruled Wessex, Mercia, East Anglia, and much of Northumbria. His authority was recognized across the land, not just by Anglo-Saxons, but also by Welsh kings, Scots, and even some Viking rulers in York. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, kings from across Britain, the King of the Scots, and the Welsh and all the people of Strathclyde submitted to Edward in 920, acknowledging him as overlord. Though not yet called King of England, Edward had become the most powerful ruler on the island. Edward the Elder was not only a warrior king, he was also a careful and capable administrator. After the reconquest of much of eastern and central England, he focused on consolidating control over his expanded realm. His strategy was a continuation of his father's legacy: secure the land, govern it effectively, and prevent further Viking incursion. He maintained and expanded the burh system, ensuring that each region had a stronghold from which law, order, and defense could be maintained. These burhs helped stimulate trade, organize taxation, and reinforce royal authority at the local level. Edward also strengthened the West Saxon legal system, likely building on Alfred's legal code. Although few of Edward's laws survive in written form, his reign saw the continuation of strong kingship grounded in law, order, and Christian values. Edward married 3 times and had an estimated 13 children, including several sons who would later become kings, and daughters who would marry into noble families across Britain and Europe. His family network extended the influence of Wessex far beyond its borders. Among Edward's children was Athelstan, who would go on to become the first king to rule all of England. Another son, Ælfwine, briefly succeeded Edward, but died soon after. Edward's daughters were also politically important, with some marrying into continental dynasties. In 924, Edward marched north to suppress unrest in Mercia and Northumbria. During this campaign, Edward fell ill and died at Farndon in Cheshire on 17th July 924. Edward the Elder was succeeded by his son Athelstan, a bold and capable ruler who would go on to unite all of England and become the first true king of a fully unified English nation.